Currently, Affliction is considered the worst raid spec in terms of DPS. It's even considered so bad that Warcraft Logs doesn't even have an option to search for it to see any type of log work. In our opinion, the why is seemingly pretty simple. The damage multipliers just aren't there like they are for fire destruction locks like Lake of Fire, having only one offensive rune in Haunt that scales by leveling versus Chaos Bolt and Incinerate, and how well they pair together. Our dot levels being mismatched, giving us a decent agony at level 38, but our corruption was last updated at level 34. And the next rank comes at level 44, making this again the exact same issue that we will experience next phase at 50, since we don't get another corruption rank till 54 after 44. And lastly, the majority of the raid group's fight lengths right now are just too short to take advantage of any potential long-term damage via dots. So what would Affliction need to be able to properly compete with Destruction? While true, we have some stuff coming that will help Affliction locks in the future phases, like Unstable Affliction or dots being able to crit, both being very helpful to our long-term damage. But Fire Destruction honestly also gets some equally, or probably honestly more powerful options in the Fire Aura Wrist Rune and Backdraft Helmet Rune. The Backdraft Rune will allow you to cast your spells 30% faster when you cast Conflag, and basically on a permanent basis, as it lasts for 10 seconds and Conflag has a cooldown of 10 seconds, meaning you can keep it up as long as you can time your Conflags right. Considering all those things together, it is seemingly impossible for Affliction to ever truly compete, especially the higher levels we go, at least on paper. It's no secret that the runes we already have are also just very destruction heavy, and when combined together will make Fire Destruction an absolute monster for caster DPS, between Lake of Fire, Backdraft, the AoE Wrist Fire Aura, Incinerate, Grimoire of Synergy or Shadow and Flame, Demonic Knowledge and Chaos Bolt, plus all of your fire spells also benefit from Recursive Elements bonus damage. As far as we can tell, Invocation, Everlasting Affliction, Haunt, Master Channeler, and Soul Siphon are the only ones we're definitely meant to enhance the Affliction playstyle. But out of all of them, only really Haunt and Master Channeler seem to be making an actual impact to the Affliction gameplay style. Everlasting Affliction can see some use as a tank rune to help keep your dots up in niche situations with Shadow Cleave, but generally you won't use it as a DPS rune because just spamming Incinerate honestly in its place, even as an Affliction spec Warlock, will just deal more overall damage. And this is before you even contrast some of the talents available to the other specializations at the appropriate talent point breakpoints. For example, Siphon Life is pretty good for farming and PvP, but is generally considered a PvE DPS loss when cast in place of literally any other damaging spell, even if you're casting it on trash to pad your parses in raids or dungeons. Contrast that with Demonic Sacrifice for Demonology, a literal playstyle changing talent giving multiple useful effects based on the sacrifice that you make, or the flashy big numbers produced by the game changer Ruin. It's a literal night and day difference to how impactful these 21-point talents are for the other specializations in raiding to Affliction's 21-point Siphon Life. Hell, I'd even go as far to say Siphon Life is the worst raid PvE 21-point talent in the game, pound for pound across all classes. I also hear the argument that not all talents need to be useful in raiding, but both Demonic Sacrifice and Ruin aren't just good in raiding. They're so good for Warlocks in pretty much every mode of play that you could have that even in Season of Discovery, builds will do their best to at least try to pick up Ruin or Demonic Sacrifice depending on what they're hoping to accomplish. I will, however, be the first to admit that Demonic Sacrifice may not end up being as useful at in-game Season of Discovery compared to original vanilla WoW Warlock raiding, but is still a viable choice, especially if the damage bonus modifier outweighs the spell power you would have gained from having the stats on your pet. Siphon Life feels more like a Fell Domination or Shadowburn tier talent, something in the 10 to 15 point range, not a 21 point talent. However, since the divs have already said they refuse to do any major talent changes despite this being an experimental Season of Discovery, because it will impact the Classa era talents, I guess them changing it around is entirely off the table despite it being an oversight on the original developers in our opinion, and how unimpactful the actual ability has proven to be for PvE. But does the developers' refusals to mess with the talents in a major way mean that they should be adding more runes specifically useful to Affliction that won't also increase Fire Destruction's power as well? Should Haunt's bonus damage maybe be increased to a higher percentage? Should Ruin be changed to increase the bonus crit damage for dots as well, so that it wouldn't change anything on Era, since dots can't crit by design there anyways? Ideally, I'd love for them to start with Ruin as a change, so that we can adapt the SM Ruin build from Classic into a true Affliction DPS build. allowing our dots to crit for 100% of their damage and then also getting some extra goodies for Shadow Bolt on the way to Ruin. But outside of something like those options, I unfortunately don't have a lot of other thoughts on how to fix this. I can only think I've identified some of the problems that will become even more pronounced as we get closer to 60, even just based on the information we the players know about. I'd even bet that they will have other slots like shoulder or weapon runes that they introduce eventually at 60 or into 60, which possibly gives them more flexibility in getting Affliction some help down the road. But, as a person who only plays the game and makes stupid videos, I have no idea what they should do long term to give some Affliction real help to make it a contender. Currently, it seems the developers' class philosophy seems to be that Affliction is our shadow damage tree that they want us to use for like tanking, PvP, and leveling, while the destruction tree is now more focused on fire damage for PvE and PvP, since Shadow Bolt, Shadow Cleave, Shadow Flame, and Shadow Burn are our only direct damage shadow destruction spells. But out of those four, only Shadow Bolt and Shadow Cleave by extension are the only shadow spells to get talents that specifically enhance them, via Bane and Improved Shadow Bolt. It also doesn't help that while we do cast a lot of Affliction spells in the playstyle right now, the bulk of our damage comes from our filler destruction spells like Shadow Bolt or Incinerate. This won't change either as the phases go on and we get to 60 based on the current data mined runes, except you'll add in Unstable Affliction to the rotation and cast maybe 1 or 2 less filler spells before renewing your dots. And that in our opinion is a problem, because if I spend more time casting spells that aren't even in my spell school than spells I actually put talents into to enhance and make stronger, that's bad gameplay in our opinion. And again, realistically, not every specialization has to be good for every class in raids. However, since the developers have said they wanted to change things up from the normal status quo, I wonder why Affliction hasn't received more love so far then. Affliction in original vanilla has always been a super meme for PvE in-game content, mostly because of the debuff limit in the original version of the game, but even when they removed that in Season of Mastery, it just didn't produce anywhere as much damage as the destruction builds did. So, only seeing some use in AQ40 and Nax because the SM Ruin build allowed you to do okay-ish Shadow Bolt damage while maxing out the improved Imp talent for the tanks to get a better Blood Pact effect. Yet, the build also focused, again, just spamming Shadow Bolts as its primary damage dealing spell and casting Corruption occasionally. But if you weren't on Blood Pact duty back then, you were playing Demonic Sacrifice Ruin and also just spamming Shadow Bolts, and if you're on Curse duty, the occasional Elements, Shadows, or Recklessness. Now it seems at 60, people will mostly be fire destruction unless MC and BWL keeps the fire immunities in place, but even with that, in our opinion, all that will happen is Warlocks will just go right back to some sort of improved Shadow Bolt Ruin build, focused on spamming and maximizing your Shadow Bolt damage, whether that's via Demonic Sacrifice or some newer build focusing on Demonic Knowledge and increasing our pet stats. And with that, if you've enjoyed our content and would like to see more, why not throw us a sub and a like on the video? Otherwise, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks and have a good night.